Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku inherited the Sharingan as the last Uchiha? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world for a 4-year-old was a symphony of simple truths. The warmth of his mother's hand was safety. The smell of katsudon was love. The sound of his father's laugh was a shield against all the monsters that might hide under the bed. On that rainy Tuesday night, Izuku Uchiha was cocooned in these truths, curled on the living room floor with an all-might action figure clutched in his hand, its plastic smile as bright and unwavering as the real thing. Rain lashed against the windows of their small, secluded home on the outskirts of Mizurifu. It was a rhythmic, soothing sound, a gentle counterpoint to the quiet hum of the television. His father, Hisashi, sat in his armchair, a newspaper resting on his lap. His eyes, dark and sharp, were not on the newsprint but on his son. A small, fond smile played on his lips. Inko, his mother, was humming in the kitchen, the clatter of dishes a familiar, comforting percussion. Izuku. Hisashi's voice was a low, pleasant rumble. It's getting late. Time to get ready for bed. Izuku pouted, holding up his toy. But All Might has to beat the villain, Hisashi chuckled, a sound that always made Izuku feel safe. All Might has already won. He always does. Now, it's time for his sidekick to rest up for tomorrow's mission. It was then that the symphony of simple truths shattered. It wasn't a loud noise at first. A dull, heavy thud from the front of the house, like a tree branch falling in the storm. But it was wrong. It was a discordant note that made the hair on Izuku's arms stand up. Hisashi was on his feet in an instant, the newspaper sliding to the floor. The fond smile was gone, replaced by a mask of hardened steel Izuku had never seen before. Inko, he said, his voice stripped of all warmth. It was flat, cold, and dangerous. Inko appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, a dish towel in her hands. The look that passed between his parents was silent, but it screamed with 1,000 unspoken words. Fear. Resignation. A terrifying, grim resolve. Izuku. Inko knelt, her hands gripping his small shoulders. Her touch was trembling. I need you to play a game with me. A very important game of hide-and-seek. You're going to hide in the upstairs closet, the one in Mommy and Daddy's room. And you can't make a sound until I come and get you. No matter what you hear. Can you do that for me, my sweet boy? Can you be the best hider in the world? Tears pricked at Izuku's eyes. This wasn't a game. The fear scenting the air was too thick, too real. But he saw the desperate plea in his mother's green eyes and nodded, his throat tight. His father was already moving toward the front door, his posture changing. He seemed to grow larger, his shoulders broadening as he settled into a low, predatory stance. Something flickered in his dark eyes, a flash of deep, bloody crimson. Hisashi, Inko whispered, her voice breaking. Get him safe, was all he said. Inko scooped Izuku into her arms and ran. She flew up the stairs, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ear. She didn't place him in the closet gently. She pushed him in, deep behind hanging coats that smelled of cedar and her perfume. She pressed a finger to her lips, tears now streaming freely down her face. I love you, Izuku. More than anything. Then she closed the door, plunging him into darkness. The lock clicked shut. The sounds that followed would be seared into his memory for the rest of his life. A splintering crash from downstairs. His father's enraged shout, followed by a sickening, wet crunch and then a deafening silence where his voice should have been. Izuku's small body shook uncontrollably. He clamped his hands over his mouth to stifle a sob, the fabric of his father's old coat scratching against his cheek. He could hear his mother's panicked breathing just outside the closet. Heavy, deliberate footsteps ascended the stairs. They were slow, unhurried. The sound of a predator that knew its prey was cornered. A foolish sentiment, running, a voice said. It was deep, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a tombstone. Your eyes would have been a fine addition. A shame your husband ruined them in his defiance. Stay away from my son! Inko's voice, raw with terror and grief. There was a choked gasp, a struggle, and then the same final, horrid sound he had heard from downstairs. A soft thud followed as her body hit the floor. Silence. A thick, coppery smell began to seep under the closet door. Izuku was paralyzed, his mind a whirlwind of white noise and terror. Don't make a sound. No matter what you hear. His mother's words were a mantra, the only thing keeping him from screaming until his lungs gave out. The heavy footsteps moved closer. They stopped right in front of the closet. The doorknob rattled. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, praying to All Might, praying to anyone, to make the monster go away. The door didn't open. It exploded inward, splintering into 1,000 pieces. Izuku was thrown back against the wall, with shards stinging his face. He blinked, his vision blurry with tears. A silhouette stood in the doorway, a hulking figure that blotted out the dim light from the hallway. He couldn't see a face, only a dark, ornate mask that seemed to drink the very light from the room, and a pristine business suit that was horribly out of place amidst the carnage. The figure tilted its head, an inquisitive gesture that was more terrifying than any scream. Well now? An ember left in the ashes. I thought I felt another one. The man took a step into the closet. Izuku scrambled back, pressing himself into the corner. He could see his mother's still form on the floor just outside, her green hair splayed out like a tragic halo. The sight ripped a choked sob from his throat. His gaze snapped from his mother to the monster, and in that moment the universe broke. An agony unlike anything he had ever known erupted behind his eyes. It felt like twin pokers of white-hot iron were being shoved into his skull. He screamed, a raw, piercing sound of pure anguish. The world, which had been a blur of tears and terror, sharpened with impossible, horrifying clarity. He could see the individual dust motes dancing in the sliver of light from the hallway. He could see the intricate grain of the wood on the floorboards, stained dark with his mother's blood. He could see the fine weave of the fabric on the monster's suit. The world slowed to a crawl, each raindrop streaking down the distant window an individual, crystalline jewel, and in the reflection of a small metal buckle on the monster's shoe, he saw his own eyes. They were no longer the soft green of his mother's. They were a burning, shocking crimson, and in each eye, a single black comma, a tomo, spun slowly, lazily, like a drop of ink in a pool of blood. The monster paused. The head tilted again. The Sharingan, awakened by trauma, as always. How quaint. He seemed to consider the small, crying boy. But you are just a child. A seed. Not yet worth the harvest. The man turned, his interest apparently lost. He walked away, his heavy footsteps descending the stairs and fading into the sound of the storm. Izuku was left alone in the splintered closet, the silence of the house pressing in on him, the coppery smell of death choking him. He stared, unblinking, at his mother's body, his newfound vision taking in every terrible, perfect detail. The world had shown him its ultimate truth, monsters were real, and his father's laugh was no longer a shield. Hours later, a new sound cut through the rain. A frantic banging on the broken front door. Hisashi! Inko! Are you in there? A short, elderly man in a yellow hero costume burst in. He froze in the entryway, his eyes widening in horror at the scene. It was the hero Gran Torino, but the usual gruffness on his face was replaced with pure devastation. He followed the trail of death upstairs, his movements stiff with dread. He found Izuku in the closet, still huddled in the corner, shaking. The boy wasn't crying anymore. He was just staring, his eyes wide. Gran Torino knelt, his heart breaking. Izuku, my boy! He whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. Izuku looked at him, and for a split second, the old hero saw it. A flash of red. A pattern in the boy's eyes that belonged to a ghost, to a clan that was supposed to be a myth whispered among the oldest of heroes. The Uchiha. He thought Hisashi was the last. He was wrong. He swept the child into his arms, holding him tight. It's okay, son. I've got you. I've got you. Izuku didn't respond. He just buried his face in the hero's shoulder, the crimson in his eyes fading back to a haunted, empty green, the single black tomo retreating into the depths of his soul, waiting. 10 years later, the world was still a symphony, but the truths were different now. The scrape of chalk on a blackboard was boredom. The explosive crackle from the desk behind him was a threat. The reflection in the mirror each morning was a lie. Izuku Midoriya stood before the bathroom sink, a small, blister pack in his hand. He carefully popped out 2 thin, flexible discs. He leaned in close to the mirror, pulling down his lower eyelid. For a moment, his real eyes stared back at him. They were a deep, vibrant green, a perfect match to the memory of his mother's. But it was a fragile illusion. Any strong emotion, fear, anger, even a sudden, shocking joy, could shatter it. With practiced ease, he placed the green-tinted contact lenses over his corneas. The world's colors muted slightly, a small price to pay for normalcy. For safety. Midoriya. The name was his mother's. The name Gran Torino had given him when he was entered into a top-secret protection program. The name Uchiha had been buried with his parents, a secret too dangerous to carry. Your eyes, kid, Gran Torino had told him, years ago. They are a legacy, but also a target. The man who did this, he was hunting your family for them. You must never, ever let anyone see them, so he never did. He was Izuku Midoriya, a quiet, quirkless boy. The crimson eyes and the single, dormant tomo were his secret shame, a constant, burning reminder of the night he lost everything. All right, you third years, the teacher announced, slapping a stack of papers on his lectern. It's time to start thinking seriously about your futures. I'd hand out these career aptitude tests, but... He smirked, tossing the papers into the air. Why bother? I know you all want to go for the hero track, the class erupted. Quirks flared to life, fingers stretching, small rocks floating, sparks dancing on fingertips. Izuku just hunched lower in his seat, scribbling furiously in his notebook. Hero analysis for the future, number 13. He wasn't just doodling. His gaze swept the room, and though his eyes were sheathed in green, the Uchiha bloodline saw things differently. He wasn't just watching his classmates show off, he was dissecting them. Miyashida's rock levitation has a weight limit of approximately 5 kilograms and a range of 3 meters. Weak against speed-based attacks, Yamamoto can stretch his fingers, but the tensile strength decreases with length, making him vulnerable to being tied up or snapped back. It was an automatic, ceaseless analysis, a function of his mind he couldn't turn off. It was the only way his power manifested safely, channeled into obsessive observation. Yes, you've all got some impressive quirks, the teacher droned on. But no using them in school. Hey, teach, a gratingly familiar voice drawled. Don't lump me in with these losers. Katsuki Bakugo sat with his feet on his desk, a sneer plastered on his face. I'm the real deal. These extras will be lucky to end up as sidekicks to some D-lister. I'm Yue material. The class turned on him, but Bakugo's arrogance was backed by power. He had aced the mock exams. He had a flashy, powerful quirk. He was a sure thing. Oh, that's right, Bakugo, the teacher said, looking at his clipboard. You've applied to UA. Murmurs of shock and awe filled the room. UA High, the #1 hero academy in Japan. And Midoriya, you've applied to UA as well, haven't you? The room went dead silent. Then, it exploded with laughter. It was sharp, cruel, and aimed directly at him. Midoriya? No way, you can't get into the hero course just by studying. He's quirkless. What can he even do? Izuku shrank under the weight of their mockery. It was a familiar, crushing pressure. Bakugo slowly turned in his seat, a look of pure, murderous rage on his face. An explosion erupted on Izuku's desk, blasting him backward. Listen up, Deku! Bakugo snarled, smoke wafting from his palms. You're even worse than these rejects. You're quirkless. Do you really think you can stand in the same ring as me? And no, Kaken, wait! I wasn't trying to compete with you, I swear! Izuku stammered, holding his hands up placatingly. It's been my dream since I was little. And, well, there's no harm in trying. No harm in trying? Bakugo's voice was dangerously low. Are you taking the exam just for fun? What the hell can you even do? The day only got worse. After school, as Izuku was packing his bag, Bakugo and his cronies cornered him. He snatched the hero notebook from Izuku's hands. Hero analysis for the future? He sneered, reading the cover. Seriously? Give it back, Kaken! It's mine! Bakugo just smirked, clapping the notebook between his palms. A miniature explosion blackened the cover and fused the pages together. With a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed it out the open window. It landed in the koi pond below with a sad splash. Izuku felt a cold knot form in his stomach. That notebook was everything. It was his work, his passion, his only connection to the dream that kept him going. You know, Bakugo said, placing a still smoking hand on Izuku's shoulder, his voice a low threat. If you really want to be a hero that badly, there's a quick way to do it. Just take a swan dive off the roof and pray you'll be born with a quirk in your next life. And with that, he and his friends walked away, laughing. For a moment, Izuku just stood there, shaking. The casual cruelty of it was staggering. A flicker of something cold and ancient stirred within him. His vision sharpened, the edges of Bakugo's retreating form becoming unnaturally clear. He saw the slight tension in his shoulders, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hands. He wasn't just angry, he was threatened by him. The thought was so absurd it short-circuited the burgeoning rage. The cold feeling receded, leaving only the familiar ache of despair. He retrieved his soggy, ruined notebook from the pond and started the long walk home, his head hung low. The world seemed to agree with Bakugo. What can you do? It was in a dark underpass that his day took a turn from merely horrible to life-threatening. A gurgling, sloshing sound echoed from behind him. He turned, and a monster made of green, viscous sludge rose from a manhole cover, its two large, yellow eyes fixing on him with predatory glee. A medium-sized invisibility cloak! The villain gurgled, lunging. Panic seized him. Sludge forced its way down his throat, into his lungs. It was suffocating, overwhelming. He clawed at the liquid body, his fingers finding no purchase. His vision started to swim, black spots dancing at the edges. Is this it? Is this how I die? Then, a voice boomed like a thunderclap. Have no fear, for I am here. The manhole cover flew off, and All Might, in all his sunbright glory, stood there. Texas smash! A hurricane of wind pressure tore the sludge villain apart, scattering it against the tunnel walls. Izuku collapsed, gasping for air, his lungs burning. He looked up into the smiling, confident face of his idol. His savior. The rest was a blur of frantic apologies, a signed notebook, and a desperate, ill-advised decision to grab onto All Might's leg as he jumped. They landed on a rooftop, and it was there that Izuku's world, already shattered once, was ground into dust for a second time. He saw the hero's true form, a skeletal, wraith-like man coughing up blood. He heard the story of the devastating injury, the ticking clock on his hero work. And then, after pouring out his heart, his dreams, his secret of being quirkless, he asked the question that had defined his entire existence. Can I be a hero, even without a quirk? All Might looked at him, his expression grim and weary. No, he said, the word a physical blow. Pros are always laying their lives on the line. I cannot simply say, you can be a hero even without power. He told him to be realistic. To become a police officer or a doctor. He left Izuku alone on that rooftop, his dreams lying in a smoking ruin at his feet. As Izuku trudged down the stairs of the building, his mind a numb haze of static, an explosion rocked the city street a few blocks away. Curiosity, a dull and pointless habit, pulled him toward the chaos. A crowd had gathered. The sludge villain had escaped All Might and captured another victim. The heroes on the scene were struggling. Kamui Woods couldn't get close because of the fire. Empty Lady was too big for the narrow street. Backdraft was busy containing the blaze. No one had the right quirk to handle the situation. Then Izuku saw who the villain had captured. Blonde, spiky hair. A furious, terrified face. It was Bakugo. He was fighting back, setting off explosions within the sludge. But it was only making things worse, feeding the flames and preventing the heroes from getting a clear shot. His eyes, usually so full of arrogant fire, were wide with mortal terror. And in that moment, Izuku's eyes met his. It was a look of pure, desperate pleading. Something inside Izuku shifted. The hero's words, All Might's words, Bakugo's words, they all vanished. His legs, as if with a mind of their own, were moving. He was running, pushing through the stunned crowd, past the shouting heroes. But it wasn't just a blind, heroic impulse. As he ran, the adrenaline and terror hit him like a physical force. The world slowed. The cheap green contacts he wore suddenly felt like they were searing his eyeballs. Through the haze of his panic, his Uchiha blood screamed at him. He saw it. It wasn't a thought. It was pure, instinctual data flooding his brain. The villain's body is fluid, but its eyes and teeth are solid. Bakugo's explosions, while uncontrolled, are creating momentary pockets of air as they blast the sludge away from his face. For 1.3 seconds after each blast, the villain's right eye is forced to the surface and is momentarily unobscured. The angle is difficult, but not impossible. He didn't know he was processing this. All he knew was that there was an opening. A chance. He ripped his backpack off his shoulders and flung it with all his might. Guided by an instinct he didn't know he possessed, the bag flew true, striking the villain directly in its exposed right eye. The monster roared in pain, its grip on Bakugo faltering for a precious second. It was all Izuku needed. He was there, clawing desperately at the sludge, trying to free Bakugo's mouth and nose. "Kaken, what the hell are you doing here, Deku?" Bakugo choked out. "I don't know. My legs just started moving," he yelled back, his voice cracking. You looked like you were asking for help." That single, honest statement seemed to cut through Bakugo's pride and terror. For a fraction of a second, the fight in him stilled. The villain recovered, raising a slimy tendril to smash the life out of this insignificant gnat. Izuku looked up and saw death coming for him. "I really am pathetic," a voice boomed. All Might, his muscular form returned, stood between Izuku and the villain. He grabbed both boys, his hand gripping the sludge monster's body. "I told you the tricks of the trade, but I wasn't living by my own ideals. Pros are always risking their lives." His fist drew back, blood trickling from his mouth. "Detroit. Smayas!" The punch was so powerful it changed the weather. The sludge villain was splattered into nothingness, and the force of the blow created an updraft that caused the clouds to part and rain to fall, extinguishing the fires in an instant. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The other heroes praised All Might and collected the villain's remains. The press swarmed. And the heroes who had done nothing but stand by. They came over to scold Izuku. "That was incredibly reckless, kid. There was no reason for you to put yourself in danger." He just stood there and took it, his head bowed. They were right. He hadn't done anything. He had just made things worse. Later, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the street, he started his walk home again. "DKU!" He turned. Bakugo was running to catch up, his face a complex mask of anger and confusion. I never asked you for help," he said, his voice strained. "And you didn't help me. Got it? I was fine by myself. So don't you go thinking you can look down on me. Don't you forget it." He turned and stomped away, his shoulders rigid. Izuku watched him go. It was the closest thing to a thank you he was ever going to get from Kaken. A small, sad smile touched his lips. It was okay, he was alive. Kaken was alive. That was enough. "I am here!" All Might slid around the corner, striking a dramatic pose before deflating back into his skeletal form with a puff of steam. "Young man," he began, a trickle of blood running from his chin. "I came to thank you. And to apologize. And also, to make you a proposition." Izuku stared, bewildered, at the scene of the fight. All Might continued, his voice serious. "I told you that you couldn't be a hero. But then I saw you, a timid, quirkless boy, jump into action while I stood there frozen. You spurred me to act. There are stories about all the great heroes, how they changed the world. And most of them have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think." Tears began to well up in Izuku's eyes, his breath catching in his chest. "That is what happened to you today." All Might looked at him, his sunken eyes burning with an intense light. "Young man, you, too, can become a hero." The words hit Izuku like a physical force, and the dam of his emotions broke. He collapsed to his knees, sobbing, the tears he'd held back all day, all year, all his life, finally flowing free. It was everything he had ever wanted to hear. He looked up at the skeletal form of his idol, his vision blurred. The setting sun was a brilliant orange fireball behind All Might, and its light slanted across Izuku's face. "I accept," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. As he looked up, the intense flood of relief and vindication was a shock to his system, second only to the trauma of that night 10 years ago. For a fleeting, imperceptible moment, something deep within him stirred. The green contact lens, a simple piece of colored plastic, was no match for a power born of blood and eons of history. All Might's sharpened senses, honed by decades of battle against the world's most dangerous villains, caught it. It wasn't a glow. It wasn't a quirk activation. It was something far stranger. For less than half a second, behind the tear-filled green of the boy's left eye, a deeper light shone through. A profound, impossible crimson, and within that red he saw it, a single, black comma, spinning into place with the finality of a closing lock. The hero froze, his breath catching in his chest. He had seen that symbol before, not in person, but in the deepest, most classified archives of hero history, in the files that detailed the age before quirks, when legends walked the earth. A Kekii Genkai so powerful, so feared, it was called the Eye of Heaven, the Uchiha clan. Wiped out years ago by All for One himself in his quest for power. All Might had thought them all gone, a tragic footnote in his arch-nemesis's bloody history. But here, kneeling before him, was a supposedly quirkless boy. A boy with the heart of a true hero. And for one impossible moment, the eyes of a legend. The light vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only the earnest, crying green eyes of Izuku Midoriya. But All Might had seen it. The ember had not been extinguished. It had been hiding, waiting, and he, the symbol of peace, had just offered to pour the gasoline of one for all onto it. "Young man," All Might said, his voice suddenly grave, all traces of his earlier speech forgotten. "Your name is Midoriya. But what was your father's name?" The question hung in the cooling evening air, sharp and heavy as a shard of glass. It was so unexpected, so jarringly personal, that it completely derailed the locomotive of joyous emotion that had been thundering through Izuku's mind. One moment, he was at the pinnacle of his life, his wildest dream affirmed by his greatest idol. The next, he was thrown back into the shadows of his past by a single, simple question. "What was your father's name?" Izuku's breath hitched. His tears, which had been a flood of pure, unadulterated joy, seemed to freeze on his cheeks. A familiar, cold dread, the kind that had been his constant companion for a decade, coiled in his stomach. Why? Why would All Might ask that now? His name was Hisashi. Izuku stammered, his voice suddenly small again. He instinctively looked down, away from the hero's piercing gaze. Hisashi Midoriya. It was a practiced lie, the cornerstone of the fragile identity he had lived in for 10 years. It felt like ash in his mouth. All Might did not move. His skeletal frame seemed to cast an impossibly large shadow in the dying light. The cheerful, booming persona was gone, replaced by a solemnity that was far more intimidating. "Young man, look at me!" Reluctantly, Izuku lifted his head. All Might's sunken blue eyes weren't angry, nor were they accusatory. They were filled with a deep, unsettling seriousness, an intensity that saw through the flimsy wall of his lie. "A moment ago, when you looked at me," the hero said, his voice a low rumble, "I saw something. Something in your eye. It was just for a fraction of a second. A flash of red. A pattern, a symbol I've only seen in the oldest, most classified hero archives. The kind of files they don't even keep on the servers anymore." Every word was a hammer blow against Izuku's defenses. The cold dread in his stomach turned into a churning sea of panic. He saw? How could he have seen? I was crying, the light was in my eyes, it's impossible. He had spent a decade perfecting his control, hiding his secret from everyone. Teachers, classmates, bullies, strangers on the street. No one had ever noticed. No one. "I don't know what you're talking about," Izuku whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs. "My quirk. I'm quirkless. My eyes they're just green, are they?" All Might took a half-step closer. He was no longer speaking as the symbol of peace, but as Tashinori Yagi, a man who had seen too much of the world's darkness to be easily fooled. "I fought a villain a long time ago. My greatest enemy. He was obsessed with power, with collecting the quirks of others. He told me stories sometimes. Boasted of his conquests. He spoke of an ancient clan, a family whose eyes held a power that predated quirks themselves. A power he coveted above all others. He claimed to have wiped them all out, to have taken the last of their precious eyes for his collection. All Might's gaze was unwavering. He called them the Uchiha, the name, the forbidden name, the cursed name. The name that was whispered to him in a sterile government office by a grim-faced Gran Torino. The name on his parents' secret gravestone, a stone he was only allowed to visit once a year, in the dead of night. The weight of it, spoken aloud by his hero, was too much. The careful composure he had maintained for a decade, the wall built of lies and denial and fear, crumbled into dust. A ragged, agonized sob tore its way from his throat. This time, the tears weren't of joy or relief. They were born of 10 years of solitude, of carrying a grief so immense, and so secret that it had nearly crushed his soul. He fumbled at his face with trembling hands, his fingers clumsy and slick with tears. He pinched the edge of the cheap plastic disc in his left eye and pulled. It came away with a small, wet sound. He did the same with the right. He held the two flimsy green circles in his shaking palm as if they were the shells of a life he could no longer inhabit. He squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, then opened them. Toshinori Yagi had prepared himself for what he might see, but the reality was still a shock. The boy's eyes were no longer the simple, earnest green of a moment ago. They were a startling, luminous crimson, a shade of red so deep it seemed to absorb the twilight around them. And floating in that sea of blood was a single, perfectly formed black comma, a tomo. It spun slowly, a tiny vortex of darkness in an eye that held a universe of pain. The boy wasn't just crying anymore. He was weeping from a wound that had never been allowed to heal. My name, he choked out, the words ripped from the deepest part of him, is Izuku Uchiha. Toshinori felt a profound, aching sorrow settle over him. The boy was real. The legend was real. And the failure it represented was his and his alone. The monster he had failed to defeat, the villain who had given him his grievous wound, had done this. All for one had orphaned this child. He had left this small, terrified ember to smolder alone in the ashes of a once proud clan. Thank you for telling me, young man, Toshinori said, his voice gentle. Thank you for trusting me. He looked around the exposed rooftop. This was not the place for a conversation of this magnitude. Come, let's go somewhere more private. There is much we need to discuss. They ended up on a deserted bench in a small, quiet park as the last vestiges of sunlight bled from the sky and the city lights began to bloom. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and car exhaust. Izuku sat hunched over, his hands clasped tightly between his knees, his revealed crimson eyes fixed on a crack in the pavement. He had stopped crying, but a hollow, exhausted numbness had taken its place. Toshinori gave him a moment, letting the quiet of the evening settle around them before he spoke. Tell me what you remember, young Uchiha. And please, only what you are comfortable sharing. He used the name deliberately, a sign of acceptance, a confirmation that the secret was safe with him. Izuku took a deep, shuddering breath. He hadn't spoken of that night to anyone since he was 4 years old, huddled in Gran Torino's arms. The memories were a chaotic jumble of a child's terror, sharpened by the horrifying clarity his newly awakened Sharingan had provided. Rain, he began, his voice barely a whisper. It was raining. We were at home. I was playing with my All Might figure. A bitter, ironic smile flickered on his lips for a second. My father, he told me it was time for bed. Then there was a noise. A crash. He closed his eyes, and the images flooded back, no longer hazy, but as sharp and clear as the moment they happened. The Sharingan didn't just see, it remembered. Perfectly. My father, his face changed. I'd never seen him look like that. He told my mother to take me and hide. She put me in the closet in their bedroom. She told me it was a game, to be the best hider in the world. His voice cracked. She locked the door. Toshinori remained silent, his face a grim mask. He simply listened, bearing witness to the boy's pain. I heard my father yell. There was a terrible sound. And then, he was quiet. The footsteps started coming up the stairs. They were slow. He wasn't in a hurry. Izuku's hands began to tremble. There was a man's voice. It was calm. Empty. He said something about my mother's eyes, that they would have been a fine addition. Then she screamed for him to stay away from me, and then, the same sound as before. The same quiet. He was visibly shaking now, reliving the trauma in vivid detail. The smell. I remember the smell. Like old pennies. It came under the door. The footsteps stopped right outside. I thought he was going to open the door, but he didn't. He broke it. The whole door just exploded. Izuku hugged himself, trying to ward off a chill that wasn't from the night air. He was huge. A monster in a nice suit. I couldn't see his face, just a black mask. He looked right at me, and when I saw my mom on the floor, my head, my eyes, it felt like they were on fire. The whole world slowed down. I could see everything. And in a reflection, I saw my eyes. They were red. Toshinori's fists clenched at his sides. The description was chillingly familiar. The suit. The mask. The calm, detached cruelty. All for one. It was unquestionably him. He said something. Izuku murmured, his voice distant. He called them Sharingan. He said they were awakened by trauma. He looked at me for a second, and then, he just left. He said I was a seed, not yet worth the harvest. He finally looked up at Toshinori, his crimson eyes swimming with a decade of confusion and fear. What does that mean? What did he want from them? From my family? Toshinori let out a long, weary sigh. The boy deserved the truth. He had carried this burden alone for far too long. The power in your eyes, young Uchiha, the Sharingan, is a legendary ability. He explained, his voice low and somber. It can see things others cannot. It can perceive movement with impossible clarity, analyze and copy techniques, and even predict an opponent's actions. It is, in its own way, the ultimate analytical tool. A villain like the one you described, one who steals the powers of others, he would see your family's eyes as the ultimate prize. A way to analyze any quirk, any opponent, and instantly understand how to defeat them or steal their power. The pieces clicked into place in Izuku's mind with sickening finality. His family hadn't been killed in a random attack. They had been hunted. They were livestock, slaughtered for a single, valuable part of them. The thought was so grotesque it made him feel ill. After he left, I just stayed there. I don't know for how long. Then another hero came. Gran Torino. Toshinori nodded. I know him. He was my predecessor's closest friend. And mine, in a way. He taught me how to use one for all. Izuku's eyes widened. Gran Torino? He never told me. He is a man who values his privacy, Toshinori said. It makes sense that he would be the one to find you. He would have known of your family's history, their connection to the hero world's hidden past. He hid you, didn't he? Gave you your mother's name. Izuku nodded, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. He said the man who killed them was still out there. That he was a monster who collected powers, and that my eyes would make me his biggest target. He gave me the contacts. He told me to never show them to anyone. To pretend to be quirkless. He said it was the only way to stay safe. To live. He looked down at his hands. So that's what I did. I lived. I became Izuku Midoriya. A quiet, useless, quirkless Deku. I tried to forget the name Uchiha. I tried to forget the red in my eyes, because every time I felt it, every time I got too angry or too scared and the world started to sharpen, all I could see was my mother on the floor. It's not a power, All Might. It's a curse. It's the memory of the worst day of my life, burned into my vision. He finally broke, burying his face in his hands. How can I be a hero with a curse like this? A power born from watching my parents die. The silence that followed stretched on, thick with the weight of the boy's confession. Toshinori looked at the trembling child next to him, and his heart ached. He had offered his power as a reward for a heroic spirit. But now, he understood. It was so much more than that. It had to be. He placed a large, bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. The boy flinched but didn't pull away. There are old legends, Toshinori said, his voice resonating with a newfound purpose. That speak of your clan. They say that the Uchiha's power is tied to their emotions, that when an Uchiha experiences a great loss or trauma, their love turns to despair, and that despair manifests as power in their eyes. The legends call it the curse of hatred. Izuku looked up, his expression shattered. A curse, so Gran Torino was right. Perhaps, Toshinori conceded. But I am the wielder of a different kind of power. My quirk, one for all, isn't born of trauma or despair. It is the complete opposite. It is a power that is cultivated, nurtured, and passed down from one person to another. It is a crystallization of hope. It is the culmination of generations of people crying out, "I want to save people." It is a torch passed from hand to hand, fueled by the desire to bring peace and security to the world. He squeezed Izuku's shoulder gently. My offer to you has not changed, young Uchiha. In fact, it is now more important than ever. The world sees you as quirkless. A villain might see you as a prize to be harvested. I see a boy with the heart of a hero, who has been handed two of the most powerful legacies in history. One is a legacy of pain, a curse of hatred that awakens in moments of tragedy. He met Izuku's gaze, and for the first time that evening, a faint glimmer of the All Might smile returned, not the broad, camera-ready version, but a small, genuine expression of belief. The other is a legacy of hope, a sacred torch that awakens the hero within. The question is no longer just can you be a hero? The question is now something far greater. He leaned in, his voice filled with a powerful conviction that seemed to push back the darkness around them. Can a power born of hope conquer a legacy born of pain? Can you take the curse your family was burdened with and, by fusing it with the light of one for all, transform it into a blessing? Izuku stared at him, mesmerized. Conquer it. Transform it. The idea was audacious, impossible. His eyes were a brand, marking him as a victim, a survivor of a tragedy. They were a source of fear and a reminder of powerlessness. But All Might was suggesting, they could be something else. He could make them something else. He thought of his dream. It was never about fame or glory. It was about seeing a hero save people with a fearless smile, and wanting to be that smile for someone else. It was about wanting to be strong enough so that no one else had to feel the helpless terror he felt in that closet. It wasn't about revenge. He didn't want to hunt down the monster who killed his parents. He wanted to build a world where monsters like that couldn't make other children orphans. That was a goal of hope, not hatred. The conflict within him was a raging storm. The Sharingan was his past, his pain, his curse. One for all was his future, his dream, his hope. To wield both, it felt like trying to hold fire and water in the same hand. But the look in All Might's eyes told him it was possible. He believed it was possible. He believed in him. The trembling in his body slowly subsided, replaced by a nascent, unfamiliar warmth. It was the feeling of a resolve hardening in the forge of his soul. He stood up, his small frame seeming to gain a new stature in the dim park light. He looked All Might in the eye. His crimson gaze no longer filled with fear, but with a dawning, steely determination. I'll do it, he said, his voice clear and stronger than it had been all day. I will accept your power. And I will use it with my eyes. I will learn to control this curse. And I will become a hero. He took a breath, his personal vow solidifying into words. I'll become a hero who makes sure no other little boy ever has to hide in a closet while his family dies. Toshinori's smile widened. There it was. The spirit he had seen. Unbreakable. Forged in tragedy, but not defined by it. Well said, my boy. Very well said. He stood as well, reverting to his heroic form in a burst of steam, his presence once again dominating their small corner of the park. Then your road to becoming the next symbol of peace begins now. Izuku blinked, momentarily stunned by the sudden shift. All right now, All Might nodded, then deflated back into his skeletal form with a wheezing cough. Well, not this exact second. First, you must train your body. My power, one for all, is a hurricane of pure energy. An unprepared body, like yours, would be torn apart by it. Your limbs would explode. Izuku paled, imagining the grisly scene. Over the next 10 months, until the UA entrance exam, you will follow a strict training regimen I have created. The aim to pass, American Dream Plan. he announced, pulling a sheaf of papers from his pocket with a flourish. It details your diet, your sleep schedule, and your physical training, your goal, he said, pointing a bony finger toward the distance. Is that? Izuku followed his finger and saw the stretch of local coastline, Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. Or, as it was more commonly known, the local landfill. It was a mountain range of illegally dumped trash, rusted appliances, and broken furniture. You are going to clean this entire beach, All Might declared. Izuku stared in disbelief. All of it? But why? 2 reasons. 1. It is admirable community service that will train every muscle in your body in a practical way. And 2. All Might said, a cunning look in his eyes. In this day and age, heroes are all about flashy shows of power. True heroism, true strength, is often found in the quiet, thankless work of restoring something that has been broken. I want you to understand that before you inherit anything from me. Izuku looked from the mountain of trash back to All Might, a slow grin spreading across his face. It was perfect. It was hard, it was selfless, and it was the first step. There is one more thing, All Might added, his tone becoming serious again. Your eyes. We must keep them a secret, just as Gran Torino advised. The villain who hunted your family is my nemesis. He is alive, though wounded, and hiding in the shadows. If he were to learn of your existence, he would stop at nothing to claim you. So, you will put your contacts back in. To the world, you are Izuku Midoriya, a quirkless boy who, through sheer grit and training, developed a powerful quirk just in time for the UA exam. No one can know the truth. Not yet, Izuku nodded, his resolve firm. He understood the stakes. He carefully took the contacts from his pocket, and with the practiced ease of a decade of deception, he placed the green shields back over his Uchiha heritage. The world's colors dulled once more, the mask sliding back into place. But this time, it felt different. It was no longer a cage of shame. It was a tool. A strategy. He was no longer hiding from his past. He was controlling it, preparing to weaponize it for the sake of the future. All Might plucked a single strand of his golden hair. When the time is right, when your body is ready, he said, holding it out. You will eat this. Izuku stared at the hair, his expression a mixture of awe and bewilderment. This, All Might said with a completely straight face, is how the power is passed. The sheer absurdity of it, coming after the intense, emotional crucible of the evening, was too much. A laugh bubbled up from Izuku's chest. It was a real, genuine laugh, the first one he'd had all day. All Might grinned back. Welcome, young Midoriya, to the winding, and often ridiculous, path of a hero. As Izuku walked home that night, the city lights seemed brighter, the air cleaner. He was still the same boy who had woken up that morning. He still had no quirk, and he still carried the scars of his past. But now, he also had a purpose, a mentor, and a future. He had the weight of 2 names on his shoulders, Midoriya and Uchiha, and for the first time in his life, he felt strong enough to bear them both. The sun had not yet begun its ascent, and the world was painted in the cool, muted blues and grays of pre-dawn. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of waves and the cawing of distant gulls. On the sands of Dagoba Municipal Beach, this tranquil scene was brutally interrupted by the strained groan of a boy trying to move a mountain, one piece at a time. Izuku Midoriya, his thin frame already drenched in sweat that plastered his green-black hair to his forehead, strained against the rusted chassis of a derelict pickup truck. His muscles screamed in protest, his joints ached, and his lungs burned with every ragged breath. This was his new reality. His new school. His new life. And his teacher was a skeletal man sitting atop a mountain of garbage, sipping a can of lukewarm tea. Your form is terrible, my boy! All Might called out, his voice a wheezing rasp that still somehow carried across the junk-strewn landscape. You're lifting with your back. You'll snap in 2 like a dry twig. Use your legs. Your core. Izuku collapsed, his arms giving out as he fell face first into the sand. It was coarse and cold against his cheek. I'm trying, he gasped, his voice muffled. It's so heavy. This was the 3rd week of the aim to pass, American Dream Plan. and Izuku was beginning to suspect it was actually an assassination attempt disguised as a training regimen. Every morning before school and every evening after, he was here. Hauling, pulling, pushing, lifting. His diet was a meticulously planned assault of protein and healthy carbohydrates. His sleep schedule was brutally efficient. His life had become a repeating cycle of ache, exhaustion, and the ever-present, metallic scent of rust and decay. Of course it's heavy! That's the point! Toshinori hopped down from his perch with a surprising agility. He walked over and poked Izuku's trembling back with a bony finger. Your body is a vessel, young Midoriya. Right now, it's a cracked teacup. We need to forge it into a reinforced steel cauldron before we can even think about pouring the sun into it. Izuku pushed himself up, his arms shaking. He looked at his hands. They were raw, covered in a patchwork of blisters and calluses. He was stronger than he was 3 weeks ago. He knew that. He could now drag a washing machine 10 feet before collapsing, a marked improvement from his previous record of 2. But Yue's exam was in less than 10 months. At this rate, he'd be lucky to clear a single corner of the beach, let alone prepare his body for a reality-breaking quirk. There has to be a faster way. Izuku muttered, more to himself than to All Might. There is no shortcut to building a foundation, Toshinori said sternly. Then, his expression softened. However, we have not yet addressed your other asset. Izuku froze. He knew what All Might was referring to. In the 2 weeks since their fateful meeting, they had barely spoken of it. He had worn his green contacts dutifully, burying the Uchiha part of himself as he always had. He told himself he needed to focus on the physical first. But the truth was, he was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if he willingly let the curse out. My eyes, Izuku said quietly. Your eyes, Toshinori confirmed. He gestured to a half-crushed refrigerator nearby. I am going to lift that. I will do it 3 times. The first time, I want you to watch as Izuku Midoriya. The second and third time, I want you to watch as Izuku Uchiha. Remove your contacts. Izuku's heart began to race. It felt like a transgression, willingly revealing the secret he had guarded his entire life. But the man before him was All Might. He was his mentor. With trembling fingers, he reached up and carefully removed the thin green lenses, blinking as the world's colors instantly became more vibrant, more saturated. He felt a familiar, faint thrum of energy behind his eyeballs, a sleeping power acknowledging the call. All right, he said, his voice a little shaky. Toshinori nodded. He walked to the refrigerator, took a low stance, and with a grunt, heaved it into the air. He held it for a moment, then set it down. To Izuku, it was an impressive, a straightforward, feat of strength. No, Toshinori said, catching his breath. Again. But this time, look. Izuku took a deep breath and focused. He let the familiar sensation wash over him. The world shifted. A faint crimson hue bled into the edges of his vision. The gentle lapping of the waves sharpened into a series of distinct, crisp sounds. He looked at Toshinori, and his breath caught in his throat. It was like looking at a different person. He could see the intricate web of muscles tensing beneath the man's loose-fitting clothes. He saw the precise, fractional shift in his center of gravity as he prepared to lift. When Toshinori heaved the refrigerator again, Izuku didn't just see the object move. He saw the entire sequence of events, slowed to a crawl. He saw the explosive contraction of his mentor's quadriceps and glutes, the rigid line of his spine transferring the force, the ripple of kinetic energy that flowed from the ground, through his body, and into the object. It wasn't just a man lifting a box. It was a perfect, intricate symphony of applied physics. A living blueprint. Toshinori set it down. Tell me what you saw. Everything, Izuku whispered, his red eyes wide with awe. The order you engaged your muscles. The way you kept your back perfectly straight to prevent injury. The slight twist in your feet to anchor yourself. I saw how it works. Toshinori smiled, a thin, satisfied expression. Exactly. Your eyes see more than just the surface. They see the truth of a moment, the mechanics of an action. That is the Uchiha's greatest strength. Now, one more time. But this time, don't just watch my body. Try to see the power. Izuku frowned in confusion, but he complied. Toshinori took his stance again. Izuku activated his Sharingan. This time, as All Might prepared to lift, Izuku saw something else. It was faint, ethereal, like heat haze on a summer road. A shimmering, barely there aura of multicolored light flickered within Toshinori's body. When he lifted, a brilliant spark of that energy flared from his core, surging through his limbs and into the refrigerator. It was the visual representation of One for All. Izuku stumbled back, his mind reeling. I saw it was like light. Inside you. It flared up when you lifted. Toshinori's smile widened into a full grin. Incredible. Utterly incredible. You can actually see the embers of One for All. My boy, do you understand what this means? You don't have to guess how to use this power. You won't have to stumble in the dark as I did. You can literally watch how it's meant to be controlled. Your Sharingan is not a curse. It is the ultimate user's manual. That single conversation changed everything. The training became a synthesis of body and eye. Izuku didn't just lift trash anymore. He would first watch All Might lift a similar object, his one-tomo Sharingan spinning as he recorded and deconstructed the motion. He would memorize the perfect form, the exact sequence of muscle contractions, the subtle shifts in balance. Then, he would replicate it. His progress skyrocketed. The truck chassis that had defeated him in the third week was moved, piece by piece. By the end of the second month, he learned to feel the difference between the ache of exertion and the sharp pain of poor form, because his eyes had already shown him what the correct form looked like. The Sharingan's first great gift is perception, Toshinori explained one afternoon, as Izuku meticulously stacked old tires. But its second, and perhaps more famous gift, is mimicry. It allows the user to copy movement they have seen. It is how your ancestors were said to master thousands of techniques. To test this, All Might began incorporating new exercises. He demonstrated complex martial arts katas, gymnastic maneuvers, and parkour vaults over the junk piles. Izuku, with his Sharingan active, would watch once, his mind a perfect recording device. His first attempts at mimicry were clumsy. His body was still too weak, his coordination lacking. He knew what to do, but his muscles couldn't yet obey the perfect instructions his brain was sending. It's no good, Izuku grumbled, falling after a failed vault. I can see it perfectly in my head, but my body won't listen. That is the point of this, my boy. All Might laughed. Your eyes are writing checks your body can't cash, yet. But the tension between what your mind knows and what your body can do will force your physical development at an accelerated rate. The eye is pulling the fist along with it. By the 5th month, the halfway point, the change was dramatic. The scrawny, hunched boy was gone. In his place stood a youth with lean, wiry muscle etched across his frame. He was no bodybuilder, but the vague outline of his form had been replaced with the clear definition of a trained athlete. A significant portion of the beach was clear, revealing sand that hadn't seen the sun in years. Izuku's confidence grew with his strength. At school, he walked with his back a little straighter. He still kept to himself, his contacts firmly in place, but Bakugo's taunts seemed to have less of an effect. They were just noise now, a distraction from the real work that awaited him each day. It was during a sparring session in the 6th month that the next great leap occurred. It wasn't a real fight, just a light exercise in evasion and awareness. Toshinori, in his skeletal form, would swing a long piece of PVC pipe at Izuku, who had to dodge. You're relying too much on reaction, young Midoriya, Toshinori chided, swinging the pipe. You need to anticipate. Predict. I am. Izuku protested, ducking under a wide arc. With his Sharingan, he could see the attack coming with incredible clarity. He saw the twitch of Toshinori's shoulder that telegraphed the swing, the path the pipe would take. Dodging was becoming easy. Too easy. No, you're not, Toshinori said, his expression turning serious. He stopped swinging. Your eyes give you an amazing reaction time. You see the attack the instant it begins and react. But true combat is a conversation, not a series of statements. You need to see the next move before it is even conceived. That is the true potential of your Sharingan's predictive ability. He tapped his own temple. It is not just about seeing, but about processing. Now let's try something else. I want you to channel it. Just a little. Izuku's blood ran cold. Channel. One for all? Just a fraction of a percent. Not to attack, but to feel it. Let it flow into your legs, just for a second. Get used to the sensation. Izuku hesitated. He had spent months building his body, all to avoid blowing his limbs off. To willingly invite that power in, it was terrifying. I believe in you, my boy. And I believe in your eyes, Toshinori said, his voice soft but firm. Izuku closed his eyes, then opened them, the familiar crimson spinning to life. He took a deep breath, reaching for the feeling he had seen inside All Might so many times, that buzzing, vibrant wellspring of power. He pictured it, a tiny spark, and pulled it toward his legs. The sensation was instantaneous and overwhelming. It was like being struck by lightning from the inside out. A roar of static filled his ears, and a searing heat flooded his limbs. He cried out, not in pain, but in pure shock. It was too much. Far too much. Now! Toshinori's voice cut through the chaos. He lunged forward, swinging the pipe not at Izuku's body, but at the ground by his feet in a tricky, unexpected sweep. Instinct, honed by months of training and amplified by the power of the Sharingan, took over. As the raw energy of One for All threatened to tear his muscles apart, his eyes saw the future. Not a psychic vision, but a perfect, data-driven prediction. He saw the pipe's trajectory, saw the displaced sand, saw the opening it would create, and saw the devastating recoil that was about to cripple him. In the microsecond before his leg exploded, his Sharingan screamed one instruction at his brain: brace. He didn't think. He acted. His body, following the memorized blueprint of All Might's perfect form, instinctively shifted. He bent his knees, channeled the erupting energy into the ground, and used the force of Toshinori's sweep to leap backward. He landed in a clumsy heap 10 feet away, his legs screaming as if they'd been submerged in lava. The power vanished, leaving an agonizing, bone-deep ache behind. His left leg was on fire, but it was still attached. It was whole. Toshinori rushed to his side, his eyes wide with a mixture of concern and utter astonishment. Are you all right? Let me see. Izuku pushed himself up, his leg throbbing violently. It was already bruising, a hideous dark purple spreading across his calf. It hurt more than anything he had ever felt, but as he put weight on it, he realized it wasn't broken. A severe sprain, maybe some hairline fractures, but not the catastrophic explosion they had feared. It didn't break. Izuku breathed, his voice filled with disbelief. Your eyes, Toshinori said, his voice laced with awe. I saw it. For a split second, you moved before the recoil hit you. Your Sharingan didn't just predict my attack, it predicted the backlash from your own power. You instinctively adjusted to mitigate the damage. You turned an explosion into a controlled demolition. He placed a hand on Izuku's head, his expression one of profound pride. I knew it. The eye and the fist. They are meant to work together. You have done something that no other One for All user in history could have even conceived of. The sprain took a week to heal, but it was a week of revelation. The fear of One for All was replaced with a cautious respect. It was a wild stallion, but his Sharingan was the reins. He could tame it. He just needed to get stronger. The final months of training were a blur of focused intensity. He began to practice channeling OFA in tiny, controlled bursts. A 1% enhancement in his legs for a higher jump. A 0.5% reinforcement in his arms to lift something just beyond his normal strength. Each time, his Sharingan was active, acting as a real-time diagnostic system, warning him of potential overloads and allowing him to brace for the strain. The pain was immense, but he never broke another bone. The true evolution came in the 9th month. The beach was almost entirely clean. All that remained were a few of the largest, most entrenched behemoths of junk. One of them was a massive, industrial-sized refrigerator, the kind from a restaurant kitchen. It was half buried in the sand, entangled with a rusted metal frame. It was too heavy to lift, too awkward to drag. This is your final exam, Toshinori said, standing with his arms crossed. Move this, and your vessel is ready. For a full day, Izuku struggled. He tried to dig it out, but it was too deep. He tried to pull it with ropes, but they snapped. He was strong, stronger than he ever thought possible, but this object seemed to defy him. "You are trying to overpower it with brute force," Toshinori coached from the sidelines. "But you are not All Might. Not yet. You are Izuku Uchiha. You are a surgeon, not a sledgehammer. Look at the problem, analyze it. Find its weakness." Izuku stood back, panting, his crimson eye scanning the metallic monster. Toshinori was right. He was thinking like a brawler. He needed to think like a shinobi. He walked around the refrigerator, his Sharingan taking in every detail. The rust patterns. The way it was wedged against the metal frame. The distribution of its weight, which he could guess from the way the sand was compacted around it. The problem wasn't just the weight, it was the balance. It was wedged in a state of perfect, stubborn equilibrium. To move it, he couldn't just pull. He would have to apply force to multiple points in a precise sequence. A push here, a lift there, a pull at the exact right moment. It was a complex physics problem, and he had to solve it in a single, fluid motion. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes. He visualized the sequence. A 2% OF8 burst into his left leg to kick the supporting frame loose. A simultaneous 1.5% burst into his right arm to shove the top corner, shifting its center of gravity. Then, a final 3% surge into both arms to pull it free before it could settle back into the sand. It was an incredibly complex sequence. The timing had to be perfect, down to the millisecond. A single mistake, a single miscalculation in the power output, and the whole thing would either crush him or shatter his bones. He opened his eyes. The single tomo in each eye began to spin, faster and faster. He focused on the refrigerator with an intensity he had never felt before. The world around it seemed to blur, his entire consciousness narrowing down to this single, impossible task. He pushed his perception to its absolute limit, trying to see not just the present state of the object, a single future path, but all the potential variables. The way the metal might bend, the way the sand might shift, the slight tremor in his own muscles. And then, something new happened. A sharp, stabbing pain shot through his eyes, far more intense than the familiar dull ache of overuse. It felt like his brain was being rewired. The world, already preternaturally clear, sharpened to an impossible degree. The single spinning tomo in each eye duplicated. A second comma of blackness slid into place opposite the first, the two now spinning in a perfect, deadly orbit. His Sharingan had evolved. The difference was staggering. It was like upgrading from an old tube television to the latest high-definition 8K display. He could see more. Process faster. The complex sequence of movements was no longer a daunting calculation. It was a simple, intuitive path. The subtle variations he had struggled to account for were now laid bare, as obvious as letters on a page. He saw the path to victory, clear and shining. He didn't wait. He moved. His body exploded into motion, a perfect symphony of green lightning and crimson analysis. The kick to the frame landed with a sharp clang. The shove to the corner was perfectly timed, a surge of power that felt like a gentle nudge. The final pull was not a strain, but a smooth, decisive action. With a deep, groaning screech of tortured metal, the massive refrigerator slid free from the sand and toppled over with a thunderous crash. Izuku stood there, breathing heavily, his legs and arms throbbing with the familiar ache of contained power. He looked at the defeated metal beast, then at his own hands. He had done it. Young Midoriya! Toshinori's voice was a choked whisper. He had seen the entire thing. The boy's eyes had changed, and then he had moved with a precision and grace that was utterly inhuman. Izuku turned to him, a wide, triumphant grin on his face. He felt no exhaustion, only a buzzing, vibrant energy. The pain in his eyes had already subsided, replaced by a feeling of profound clarity. He could feel the new power settled behind them, calm and ready. "I did it, All Might," he said, his voice ringing with a confidence that would have been unthinkable 10 months ago. "The vessel is ready." The final month passed in a flurry of fine-tuning. Izuku, now with his two-tomo Sharingan, worked on his control with a newfound mastery. His perception was so enhanced that he could feel the flow of one for all in his body with pinpoint accuracy, allowing him to channel it with far less pain and much greater efficiency. He cleared the last of the trash from Dagoba Beach with an ease that felt almost casual. On the morning of the UA entrance exam, he stood with Tashinori on the newly pristine beach. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow across the clean sand and sparkling water. A decade of neglect and decay had been washed away by one boy's determination. Izuku was transformed. The baggy clothes he wore couldn't hide the taut, powerful lines of his body. He stood tall, his posture straight, his eyes, currently shielded by their green contacts, clear and focused. He was no longer a victim hiding from the world. He was a candidate, ready to claim his place in it. "You did it, my boy," Tashinori said, his voice thick with emotion. He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, his pride evident in his smile. "You took a symbol of public neglect and made it beautiful again. You went beyond my wildest expectations. You're the one who showed me the way," Izuku said, his own voice filled with a deep, unwavering gratitude. "You gave me the chance, All Might. You gave me a reason to stop being afraid of who I am." Tashinori's smile widened. He then plucked a single, golden strand of his iconic hair. He held it out to the boy who was no longer just a fan, but his successor. "The time has come," he said with grand solemnity, "for you to inherit my power." Izuku looked at the hair, then at All Might's completely serious face. "No," the number one hero declared, his voice booming with heroic gravitas. "Eat this." Izuku stared at the hair, then at his mentor. A grin broke out on his face. After 10 months of hellish training, after awakening a new level of his ancestral power, after preparing to take on the world, his first act as the next symbol of peace was going to be eating a piece of hair. "Yes, sir," he said, taking the strand with reverence, and just a hint of amusement. The path of a hero was indeed a ridiculous one. And he was finally, truly, ready to walk it. The main gate of UA High School was less an entrance, and more a declaration. It was a colossal archway of gleaming, futuristic metal and reinforced glass, a modern torii gate leading not to a shrine, but to a temple of a different sort, a temple dedicated to the creation of heroes. Students from all over the country swarmed towards it, a vibrant, chattering river of youthful ambition. Each one was a unique story, a cocktail of genetics and circumstance that had resulted in an equally unique quirk. And then there was Izuku Midoriya. He stood slightly apart from the crowd, his new yellow backpack slung over one shoulder, wearing his junior high gakuren for the last time. To any casual observer, he was just another nervous examinee, perhaps a little more wiry and focused than most, but otherwise unremarkable. His file, should anyone check, would paint a bleak picture. Izuku Midoriya, quirk, none. It was a single, damning word that had defined his public identity for a decade. But beneath the surface, a storm of controlled power was waiting. In his pocket, a small case held the green contact lenses that served as his mask. Today, for the first time in a decade, he was not wearing them. He had debated it with Tashinori for hours. "They will have medical checks, my boy. Scans. They will detect the lenses," All Might had argued. "It is better to go as you are. We will simply register your power as a newly manifested ocular quirk. It's rare for them to appear this late, but not unheard of." So, for the first time since he was 4 years old, Izuku was walking into a public space with his true eyes. It felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. He kept his gaze lowered, not out of his old habit of timidness, but out of a calculated desire to avoid drawing attention. He didn't need anyone looking too closely at him before the exam even began. A familiar, angry voice cut through the nervous murmur of the crowd. "Get out of my way, Deku!" Izuku turned to see Katsuki Bakugo striding towards him, his usual sneer firmly in place. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, and his gait was pure, undiluted arrogance. He didn't seem to notice Izuku's eyes, his focus entirely on the perceived slight of Izuku daring to occupy the same space as him. "Keikaken," Izuku stammered, an old, ingrained reflex he couldn't quite shake. "Don't you kaken me," Bakugo snarled, bumping his shoulder hard as he passed. "Don't think for a second you belong here. You're just a pebble on the road. Stay the hell out of my way." Izuku watched him go, a small frown on his face. He didn't feel the usual sting of fear or worthlessness. Instead, he felt a strange, analytical calm. With his Sharingan's enhanced perception, he saw the minute, unconscious tells that belied Bakugo's bravado, the slight tremor in his jaw, the way his eyes darted around, sizing up the competition. Kaken wasn't just arrogant. He was tense, coiled like a spring. He felt the pressure of this place just as much as anyone. Taking a deep breath to steady his own nerves, Izuku took a step forward, his foot catching on an uneven flagstone. He stumbled, his arms flailing as he pitched forward, a sudden, clumsy return to the Deku of old. Seriously? After all that training, I'm going to trip and fall on my face at the gate? But he didn't hit the ground. A warm hand gently touched his back, and the sensation of falling abruptly ceased. He was floating, suspended a few inches above the pavement. Whoa there! Are you okay? A bright, cheerful voice asked. He was gently lowered to his feet and turned to see a girl with a round, friendly face, rosy cheeks, and a short brown bob. She was looking at him with genuine concern. It's my quirk, she said, pressing the tips of her fingers together. Sorry for using it on you without asking, but it'd be bad luck to trip right before the exam, right? Oh, thank you, Izuku managed, his cheeks flushing. It was the first time a girl his age had spoken to him with anything other than derision or pity. I appreciate it. No problem. Well, good luck in there. She gave him a sunny smile and then hurried on her way, leaving Izuku standing there, his heart doing a strange little flutter kick in his chest. He shook his head, clearing it. Focus, Midoriya. Focus, Uchiha. He took another, more deliberate step, passing through the grand gates and into the next chapter of his life. The written exam was a blur of logic puzzles, ethics questions, and advanced mathematics. It was challenging, but Izuku's mind, already analytical by nature, had been sharpened to a razor's edge by his Sharingan training. He moved through the questions with a calm, methodical efficiency that surprised even himself. The real test began in the orientation hall. The room was cavernous, a massive auditorium filled with hundreds of hopeful students. Izuku found a seat next to the same brown-haired girl who had saved him from falling. He offered her a small, shy smile, which she returned. On the stage, the pro-hero present Mike was shouting at them, his voice amplified to an almost painful degree. He explained the practical exam with a series of flashy graphics and enthusiastic gestures. They would be sent into a massive, city-sized replica, a battle center, and would have to fight giant robots. Each robot had a point value, 1, 2, or 3, based on its difficulty. Their goal was to rack up as many points as possible in the allotted time. A tall, serious-looking boy with dark blue hair and glasses shot to his feet, his hand raised ramrod straight. Excuse me, sir. I have a question, he announced, his voice booming through the auditorium. Hit me, examinee 7111. Present Mike yelled back. On the printout, there are 4 types of villains listed. If this is a misprint, it is a great shame for a prestigious institution such as UA. He then turned, his arms swiveling to point directly at Izuku. And you, with the messy hair. You have been muttering and fidgeting this entire time. If you are not going to take this seriously, then you should leave. All eyes in their section turned to Izuku. He shrank in his seat, his face burning with embarrassment. The girl next to him looked at him with a mixture of sympathy and amusement. All right, settle down, examinee 7111. Present Mike said, holding up a hand. Your passion is appreciated. The 4th villain type is the 0-pointer. It's worth 0 points. Think of it as a stage hazard, a gimmick to avoid. I recommend you run from it. The serious boy bowed stiffly. Thank you for the clarification. My apologies for the interruption. He sat down, shooting one last disapproving glare in Izuku's direction. Izuku sighed, trying to ignore the stares. He had been muttering. It was a nervous habit, born from years of analyzing quirks and hero fights in his notebooks. Now, with the Sharingan constantly feeding him information, his brain was processing at 1,000 miles per hour, and the thoughts sometimes spilled out. As they were dismissed to their assigned battle centers, Izuku found himself standing before another set of towering gates. He recognized some of the students from the auditorium, including the kind girl and the loud, serious boy. Bakugo, thankfully, had been assigned to a different area. He took a moment to center himself, closing his eyes. The familiar hum of One for All thrummed beneath his skin, a dormant ocean of power. He could feel it, connected to every muscle fiber, every nerve ending. His Sharingan was active, the two tomo in each eye spinning lazily. The world around him was a tapestry of information. He could see the tension in the other students' postures, the slight tells that hinted at their quirks. The way one boy's skin had a metallic sheen, how a girl's hair seemed to float with static electricity. It was like seeing the code beneath the reality. "An. Start!" Present Mick's voice blared from hidden speakers. The other students looked around in confusion. "What are you waiting for? There's no countdown in a real fight. Go! Go! Go!" With a collective roar, the examinees surged forward as the massive gates slid open. Izuku was swept along with them, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This is it. 10 months, all for this moment. He broke away from the main pack, darting down a side alley. The main streets would be a chaotic free-for-all. He needed space to think, to analyze. His strategy wasn't to compete in a brawl, but to hunt. A grinding, mechanical roar echoed from his left. A one-point robot, a sleek, green machine on a single large wheel, zipped around the corner, its red optic sensor locking onto him. Time seemed to slow. His Sharingan went into overdrive, deconstructing the threat in a fraction of a second. Single-wheeled propulsion, high speed, low stability, main body armored, but the joints at the wheel axle and the neck beneath the sensor are exposed. Power source likely located in the central torso. Attack pattern, direct linear charge. The robot fired a volley of non-lethal stun rounds. To Izuku, they were moving in slow motion. He didn't even think. His body, drilled for months by All Might, moved with an economy of motion that felt utterly alien and yet perfectly natural. He sidestepped, the projectiles whizzing past him. He pushed off the balls of his feet, channeling a tiny, precise burst of One for All, no more than 5%, into his legs. It wasn't a smash, just a flicker of the immense power within. The world blurred for a second as he shot forward, covering the 20 feet between him and the robot in a single bound. He didn't aim for the armored chest. He leaped, his Sharingan tracking the vulnerable joint connecting the main body to the wheel assembly. He reinforced his right hand with a similar 5% burst, just enough to turn his fist into a hardened hammer, and struck. The impact was jarring, sending a painful shockwave up his arm, but it was nothing like the bone-shattering recoil he had feared. The metal joint buckled, twisted, and snapped. The robot, its propulsion severed, crashed to the ground with a screech of tortured metal, its optic light flickering out. 1 point, a synthesized voice announced in his ear, likely from a tracker in his exam ID. Izuku landed lightly, his legs aching but whole. He looked at his hand. It was red and throbbing, but not broken. A wide, incredulous grin spread across his face. It worked. It actually worked. The synergy was real. The Sharingan provided the targeting data, and One for All provided the surgical strike. He wasn't a cannon. He was a scalpel with the force of a battering ram behind it. He took off running, his confidence soaring. He was a predator loose in a target-rich environment. Another robot, a larger two-pointer, trundled into view, its heavy treads chewing up the asphalt. It had thicker armor and multiple cannons. It launched a volley of nets and stun rounds simultaneously. Izuku didn't slow down. His Sharingan painted a dozen different paths through the volley in his mind's eye. He weaved, ducked, and slid, the projectiles and nets missing him by inches. He was a blur of green and black, a phantom moving through a storm of steel. He saw the robot's cannons tracking him, predicted their angle of fire, and used the wall of a building to launch himself over the next barrage. He landed on the robot's back, his sneakers finding purchase on the armored plating. He could see the exposed power conduits running from the torso to the turret. He channeled a 7% burst into his fingers, shaping his hand into a rigid spear, and plunged it into the thickest cable. Electricity arced, and the robot shuddered to a violent halt, slumping like a dead animal. 2 points. He was a whirlwind of calculated precision. He moved through the battle center with a purpose and efficiency that was breathtaking. He wasn't just smashing. He was disabling. a 3% kick to a leg joint, an 8% punch to an exposed power cell, a 5% leap to avoid an attack and get into a better position. He never used more power than was absolutely necessary, his Sharingan acting as a perfect regulator, a natural limiter that kept the immense power of One for All from destroying him. The pain was a constant, low-level thrum in his limbs, a reminder of the power he was barely containing, but it was a manageable pain. A productive pain. He saw other students fighting. The loud, serious boy used engines in his calves to move with incredible speed, delivering powerful kicks. The kind girl was touching robots, making them float helplessly into the air before releasing them to crash back to the ground. They were powerful, flashy, impressive. But Izuku was different. He was quiet, efficient, and utterly deadly. He wasn't wasting a single movement. His point total climbed steadily. 1, 3, 6, 10, 15. He lost track, his mind focused solely on the hunt. The other examinees started to notice. They would see a robot lumbering towards them, only for a green blur to flash past, and the machine would collapse, its joints shattered or its power source ruptured. Whispers started to follow him. "Who is that guy? I don't know, but he's fast. Look at his eyes, are they glowing?" Izuku ignored them. He was in the zone, a state of perfect flow between mind and body. This wasn't just an exam. This was a dance. It was the culmination of his entire life. The analytical mind of a hero otaku, the perceptive power of a cursed bloodline, the borrowed strength of a legend, and the unbreakable will of a boy who refused to give up. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. A deep, groaning roar echoed through the city, shaking the very foundations of the buildings. A shadow fell over the street, vast and absolute. Izuku looked up, and his blood ran cold. Looming over the cityscape, its massive form dwarfing the 5-story buildings, was the zero-pointer. It was a mechanical titan, a Goliath of green and black steel that scraped the artificial sky. Its single, massive red eye scanned the battlefield, and its colossal arms, each the size of a city bus, swept through the streets, smashing buildings into rubble. The effect on the other examinees was instantaneous. Panic. "It's the zero-pointer! Run! It's not worth any points!" A tide of students turned and fled, a desperate scramble to get away from the unstoppable behemoth. Izuku, too, felt the primal urge to run. His analytical mind screamed at him that it was the logical choice. The robot was too big, its armor too thick. Even a 100% smash would likely only dent it, and the recoil would turn his arm to powder. Fighting it was pointless. Suicidal. He turned to join the retreat when a small, pained cry cut through the noise of the panic. "Oof!" Izuku's head snapped back. He saw her. The kind, brown-haired girl. She was on the ground, trapped under a large slab of concrete, a piece of debris thrown by the zero-pointer's rampage. Her leg was pinned, and the robot's massive metal foot was descending directly towards her, slow and inexorable. The world stopped. In that one, crystallizing moment, Izuku saw it all. The fleeing students. The indifferent, descending foot of the giant robot, and the terrified, tear-filled eyes of the girl who had shown him a simple, unprompted kindness at the gate. The scene superimposed itself over a memory he had suppressed for a decade. A dark room. A hulking, shadowy figure. The still, broken form of his mother on the floor. A hero is someone whose body moves before they have a chance to think. All Might's words echoed in his soul. Logic, strategy, and self-preservation evaporated. There was only the girl, the monster, and the burning, absolute need to act. The ocean of power within him, the dormant hurricane he had so carefully contained, roared to life. He didn't pull a small percentage. He opened the floodgates. Green lightning, far more intense than any he had channeled before, erupted around him, cracking and sizzling, kicking up dust and pebbles. His Tsutomu's Sharingan spun with frantic, furious speed. He didn't need to analyze the robot's weak points. There was only one target. One goal. He crouched, pouring the untamed power of One for All into his legs. The pain was immediate and blinding, a supernova of agony. He felt his muscles tear, his bones groan under a strain they were never meant to endure. But he didn't care. He exploded upwards. He didn't just jump. He flew. He shot into the air like a cannonball, a green missile aimed at the heart of the giant. The wind roared in his ears, and the ground shrank beneath him. He rocketed past the robot's knee, its waist, its chest. He saw the colossal head turning towards him, its red optic widening in what almost seemed like surprise. He drew his right arm back, channeling the entirety of the rampaging power into that single limb. His sleeve disintegrated, and the skin on his arm glowed with a furious, incandescent light, red veins of power branching across his muscles like a spiderweb. His Sharingan, even in the face of this overwhelming self-destruction, did its job. It visualized the perfect impact point, the one spot on the robot's massive head where the internal plating was thinnest, where the impact would cause the most catastrophic structural failure. It saw the perfect trajectory to obliterate the target without the resulting explosion raining down directly on the trapped girl. He was level with the robot's head now, a tiny gnat before a god of steel. He put every ounce of his being, 10 months of training, 10 years of grief, a lifetime of dreaming, into a single, desperate shout. Smayawash! His fist connected with the robot's faceplate. The sound was not a clang of metal. It was a cataclysm. A deafening, world-shattering boom that echoed through the entire battle center. The zero-pointer's head didn't just dent. It imploded. A shockwave, visible even in the bright daylight, erupted from the point of impact, buckling and shattering the robot's entire upper torso. The mechanical Goliath froze for a moment, its optic light extinguishing. Then, with a deep, final groan, it began to topple backward, away from the girl, crashing into the buildings behind it in a slow, thunderous avalanche of destruction. Izuku was suspended in the air, his forward momentum spent. The euphoric rush of power vanished, replaced by an agony so profound it stole his breath. He looked down at his arm. It was a ruined, mangled wreck, bent at an impossible angle, the skin a horrifying shade of purple and black. The bones were not just broken, they were pulverized. The same catastrophic force had wrecked his legs. He could feel the shattered bones grating against each other. And then, gravity reasserted its claim. He began to fall. He tumbled through the air, hundreds of feet from the ground, his body a broken puppet. Panic clawed at him. This is it. I saved her, but I'm going to die. I can't do anything. My arms are broken, my legs are broken. He was plummeting towards the unforgiving pavement. He closed his eyes, bracing for the final impact. Smack! The sensation wasn't the bone-shattering crunch of hitting the ground. It was a sharp, stinging slap across the face. His fall was abruptly, jarringly arrested. He opened his eyes. He was floating, just as he had at the gate. The brown-haired girl was below him, one hand outstretched, her face pale and strained. She had pushed herself free from the debris, her own leg clearly injured, and had slapped him to activate her quirk. Release! She gasped, her cheeks turning a little green from the effort of holding up someone her own size. He fell the last few feet, landing in a crumpled, agonizing heap. The klaxon signaling the end of the exam blared through the city. Izuku lay on the broken asphalt, drifting in and out of consciousness. The pain was a distant, roaring tide. He was vaguely aware of the other students gathering around, their faces a mixture of awe, terror, and disbelief. Did you see that? He took down the zero-pointer. With one punch, his limbs, there, destroyed. He saw the kind girl hobbling towards him, her face etched with worry and gratitude. He saw the serious boy with the glasses, his expression one of utter, stunned respect. And then he saw a tiny, elderly lady in a hero costume with a large syringe-like cane making her way through the crowd. The youthful heroine, recovery girl, she tooted as she looked down at him. My. What did you do to yourself, Sonny? There's breaking your limits, and then there's just plain breaking yourself. She leaned down and gave his forehead a soft, puckering kiss. A warm, numbing sensation washed over him, and the roaring tide of pain began to recede. His shattered bones began to knit, his torn muscles to mend. It was an exhausting, draining process, and he felt his consciousness begin to fade. His last thought before the darkness took him was a muddled, triumphant one. He had saved the girl. He had smashed the robot. He had used his eyes and his fist together. He had taken his first, brutal, bone-shattering step on the path to becoming a hero.